Victoria didn't think that Saturday would be more important than any other awkward day in family. There was received a curt call from his mother 2 months earlier. The grandfather would be 90 years old and would be good that he appeared, at least this time. There was no emotion in the voice, not a single mention of how much his grandfather wished to see her, not a question about her life in London. Just the information raw, direct, like someone announces the annual cleaning of the garden. Towards almost 3 years that Victoria did not set foot the house where he grew up. A house that no longer belongs to him, belonged emotionally. Now they lived there, his parents, his sister Natalie and Natalie's husband, as if it were a new official family in the one that Victoria never there was taken place. Roger, her husband, was who convinced him to go. He had no ties whatsoever with the in-laws and had only shared a couple of Christmases formal. But he knew ready, between the lines. Maybe you need closure, he said, and he had reason. Victoria was that daughter who had turned self-sufficient by obligation, the one that was pushed to the 18 to live alone, while Natalie received a car, trips, help and praise. Victoria had worked in coffee shops, studied night and shared rooms with unknown while building his life. Returning to that house was like stepping into an old movie, the one that was no longer recognized in non-character. But still so, it was because something inside her asked answers, even if I didn't know what questions to ask. The house didn't feel like it used to. They'd changed the curtains, repainted the walls, and everything had that artificial smell of expensive air freshener. But the strangest thing wasn't that. It was the way everyone avoided staring at her for too long, as if her presence was uncomfortable. Natalie came closer with an automatic smile, the kind of gesture that makes a colleague who is not seen does years and with who there is nothing left common. His parents were even more brief. A hug cold from his mother, a gesture with his father's head. Nobody mentioned how much time there was passed since last time. Nobody asked about his work, for his life. Everything revolved around the birthday of the grandpa, but the atmosphere was strange, forced. It seemed more like a window dressing than an intimate celebration. And he sat in a wheelchair by the window, surrounded by golden balloons and a sign that read, 90 years, Mr. Ellis. Victoria. He looked at her for long seconds. He had a white beard, thick glasses, and a blanket covering him. The legs. She smiled but said nothing. She wanted to approach her, talk to her, but something stopped. Roger, who was watching in silence, took of the arm with softness. "That's not your grandfather," he said, whispered in her ear. Victoria turned around toward him with an expression somewhere, between confused and annoyed. He thought he was joking, but in Roger's face had not irony, just a quiet, almost uncomfortable certainty. "Look closely," he insisted. And Victoria looked again at the man in the chair, and for the first time he felt a knot in his stomach that he could not explain. Victoria tried to convince herself that it was crazy, that her husband was confusing. But the more I looked at that man, the more he grew the feeling of discomfort. It wasn't just the face, slightly different, or the expressionless silence. It was the posture, the gestures, the way he avoided look at her directly. The real Mr. Ellis had a lively gaze, even in his more fragile years. He always winked the eye when seeing her, or towards some sarcastic comment. That man in front of her did not emit signs of recognition. It was like standing before a poorly directed actor, trying to portray someone he didn't know. Roger stayed close to her all the time. Time, as if he knew that the bewilderment that was beginning to take shape in his head was not going to go away alone. In one moment, when he came over to get a drink, he said in a low voice, "There's something strange about your ears. They don't have the shape. And that beard, it's fake." Victoria felt a shiver, but did not respond. He stayed motionless, looking at his mother distance, laughing exaggeratedly with a group of friends as if everything were a party genuine, in questions that had never been asked before began to appear in his mind. Done. Why I hadn't spoken for so long with his grandpa. Why did every time he called, his mother said that he was asleep or in the hospital? Why nobody had tried to bring her closer to him in recent years? Anxiety grew fast, as if something that always... It was wrong. Suddenly, I had name. Victoria approached her mother and, with a low but firm voice, asked why his grandfather said nothing. His mother pretended surprise. "She's very weak, darling." "You know how she is," she said, taking a glass of wine with tranquility. But Victoria did not remember that her grandfather had cognitive problems. Not even in the last calls, when Achieve talked with for seconds, he noticed that he was lucid. He didn't understand, as in 3 years could have changed so much. He tried dissemble, smiled and went back with Roger, but inside something was happening, breaking up. That feeling that I didn't belong their family. It was no longer symbolic. It was literal. They were hiding something, and she knew. An hour later, without telling anyone, Victoria went out into the garden and discreetly knocked on the police. His voice trembled as he explained what he suspected. It wasn't a formal complaint, at least not yet. He just wanted someone to verify the identity of that man. It was direct. "I think they are pretending that my grandfather is alive, and that it's not him." On the other end of the line, the operator didn't react. With disbelief. He only asked data, address, names. Victoria hung up and returned to the party with the heart pounding. He felt guilt, but also a determination new. She wasn't going to just stand there staring like before. Not this time. Something inside her, I knew that whether something serious happened or not, that evening everything was going to change. When the patrol arrived, nobody understood that was passing. 2 officers, they came down from the car with neutral and professional expression. Victoria stepped forward before her mother or Natalie could react. Them explained that he had doubts about the identity of the man who was being presented as his grandfather. In a matter of minutes, the atmosphere changed. The guests began to murmur, some discreetly moving away. Victoria's mother approached with a face broken down and asked in an altered voice if this was a joke in bad taste. But one of the agents already had begun to speak with the man in the wheelchair, while others asked for identification documents. The tension was palpable. The man was unresponsive. Well to questions. He stuttered, avoided eye contact, and his voice didn't sound like nothing to the Mr. Ellis's. When one of the officers carefully tried to remove the glasses and beard, there was total silence. Some guests began to leave. Others, they took out their phones. The face that was revealed was not the one of the Victoria's grandfather. He was the Mr. Ellis's younger brother, an uncle distant place that had barely appeared in her childhood memories. Chaos erupted. Screams, accusations, and Victoria's mother trying to contain the officers with confusing justifications. Roger, standing firm at his side, only squeezed the hand. Victoria didn't cry. Not yet. Because what she felt in that moment, I didn't have name. It was something between horror and relief. And in a matter of hours, everything became at an investigation scene. The police hill Humane, entrance to the house, and began to question the members of the closest family. Natalie cried inconsolably, but without saying anything clear. Victoria's father locked himself away in a bathroom for over 20 minutes. Her mother oscillated between fits of rage and incoherent statements about a misinterpretation. Victoria remained silently, watching how the whole scaffolding of appearances was crumbling before her. She didn't feel pleasure in seeing them fall in contradictions, just a kind of vertigo. As if everything that ever they did, the exclusion, abandonment, lies, would have materialized in a single night. Was a detective who later approached with a fact that made everything fit together. The real Mr. Ellis had deceased 3 years before due to natural causes, in his own room, without no official medical assistance. No one had reported his death. There was no record, no certificate, no funeral home. Yes, there was a series of transfers, banking transactions, made from your account until recently. They also discovered that the house, legally speaking, was still in the name of the grandfather, and that in her updated will, deposited in a notary's office, the only legal heir was Victoria. No one else. Her alone. And there, upon hearing that, something broke inside her. Not only had they faked the life of a man dead, they had made disappear the only person who ever lived there, had wanted unconditionally. Victoria asked to go out a moment in the garden. I needed air. I felt the heavy head, as if everything was seeing him not were really happening to her. She sat down in the bench where I used to have a snack as a child with his grandfather, and thought in the last time they spoke on the phone. It was a brief conversation, almost accidental, and he had mentioned that he wanted to see her soon, that he had important things to tell her. He never knew that were those things. After that, his mother always, he said that the Grandfather, he was asleep, sick, hospitalized, busy. And Victoria, in your pace of life, it was leaving pass. Now he understood why. They had robbed until the farewell. Not even you gave he right to know that there was dead. When came back in situation was a disaster. His mother was being escorted to a room to testify with a lawyer present. Natalie kept repeating that she didn't know anything, and her father simply avoided eye contact with everyone. The police, he found forged documents, transfer receipts, and even a wig stored in his guest bathroom. Everything had been carefully planned, but held together by a lie that was too fragile, the confidence that Victoria would never return. She had been removed from the equation, believing that it would conform with being far away. But they didn't count on that Roger would notice something so simple as the shape of an ear, nor with that she, after a lifetime being the forgotten one, would have he courage to say, "This is not right." The days following, they were a mixture of statements, lawyers, and documents that were gradually put together a complete puzzle. The notary confirmed that the will was legitimate, and that Mr. Ellis had left everything to his granddaughter Victoria, the house, the accounts, and even a little family antiques business that she neither not even I knew it existed. The reason was written in a letter signed by him. Same, because you were the only one who never asked for anything, and still, so you gave everything. That phrase accompanied for weeks, recorded in his memory as a caress and a wound at the same time. Meanwhile, her mother, her father, Natalie, and her uncle, they faced charges of concealing death, property fraud, and document forgery. There was no public trial, no scandalous headlines. Everything was resolved quietly, with light sentences and parole. But the damage was done. The family relationship, already broken for some years, was completely destroyed. Victoria did not seek revenge, not them exposed on networks. He did not give interviews. He did not insult it. Simply followed his legal process with firmness, like someone who watered a wilted plant one last time before throwing it away. And when received the keys to the home, she didn't cry. She entered alone, without Roger, without nobody. And he walked through every corner like someone visiting a scene from his own childhood. Everything seemed smaller, duller. As if the time also I would have liked to forget that place. It first thing he did was entering the room where he used to sleep, grandfather. Nothing remained of him there. They had painted the walls, changed the furniture, and put a double bed for visitors. Victoria sat in the edge of the mattress newly, feeling a void that is difficult to explain. He did not find it, not a photo, not even an old book, nor not even your old radio. It was as if he would never have existed. Only the wooden floor kept a notch next to the wardrobe, a sign that she remembered perfectly. When I was a child, the grandfather framed there his height with pencil. That little scar on the wood was the only real thing he found. And there, at last, he cried. Not for the betrayal, not for the inheritance, but because had stolen the jewel. Not even could have been in his burial. It took weeks before I could settle in. Everything required paperwork, transfers legal, cancellation of fake accounts. Roger accompanied at all times with that calm that always had, but also with a look of deep respect. He said, "I'll give it to you." I said, nor tried to justify it happened. It just was. And that was all Victoria needed. One afternoon at last, she sat alone in the armchair of the grandfather, who had miraculously been taken to the attic and kept still the smell of wood old. She poured a glass of wine, opened the windows of the living room, and it didn't turn on no light. He didn't smile, he didn't toast. He just breathed deep and allowed himself to be. For the first time in his life in that house was in peace, without having to prove anything, without asking permission to exist. With the time, Victoria decided not to renovate the house, not because you liked how it was, but because she felt that altering everything would be a way of covering up what she had experienced, and she didn't want to forget. She hung up some old photos he found in a forgotten album in his basement, recovered objects from the grandfather that the others had kept in boxes as if they were junk, reinstalled the old radio, restored his pendulum clock, and left the notch of the closet. It was his way of saying, "I do remember." He didn't invite anyone. He never spoke again, with his mother nor with Natalie. He didn't feel hate, just distance, as if we're characters from a story that I no longer needed to read. One day, Without planning it too much, it came in contact with her lawyer of the grandfather to ask him if there was anything pending. You sent a folder containing copies of handwritten correspondence that the grandfather had tried to send him during those 3 years. Letters that never reached his hands. Some they talked about memories, others about regrets, and one in particular said, "I know they won't let me see you, but I trust in which one day you will understand everything." That letter broke, not because of the content, but by imagining it, writing it alone, feeling powerless. That was the true inheritance, not the money, nor the house. It was knowing that someone that had truly loved. In silence, while all the others they pretended, Victoria saved the letters in a wooden box that he left on the desk of the grandpa. Not them, he read it again, but it didn't work either. Wanted hide them. They were testimony of what was real in amidst so many lies. Every time I passed by that fourth hour, stopped a second in front of the box. Sometimes you spoke in a low voice as if he could listen to her. She didn't ask for it answers, just shared simple thoughts. What there was cooked. How was the weather? What song had sounded in the radio? No one else needed know it. It was his small ritual, their way of keeping alive that bond that others had tried to bury. One afternoon, while sweepy hallway, received a certified letter. It came of the judge and contained the final resolution of the case. The defendants, his mother, his father, Natalie and her uncle, they wouldn't step on the jail, but they would remain disqualified from handling property strangers for 10 years. Justice there was spoken, albeit lukewarmly. Victoria did not feel satisfaction, but a kind of closure. Closed he about, it saved without emotion and continued sweeping. Because at that point understood that the real punishment was not legal, it was living. Knowing that they did, that they betrayed and that she survived the same, silently, without spectacle, simply being she. With he. As the months went by, some people in the family tried to contact her. A distant cousin he wrote on social media to know how was. An old friend of the family the called saying that he knew nothing of what had happened past. Victoria didn't respond. Not because felt resentment, but because I had learned that not every bond deserves an explanation. The people who really matter don't need excuses, neither tests. Roger it understood well, and together they began to build a quiet routine, without big gestures, but full of small ones, acts of reparation. They drank coffee in the terrace, they cooked recipes new, they read books by the night. For the first time, life did not ask to be alert. One morning, while I was organizing some papers ancient, found a drawing that there was girl's fact. She and her grandfather sitting in a garden, with a huge sun above and the word home written in crooked letters. He held it in his hands for several minutes. He didn't cry. He just smiled with sadness. Because I understood that somehow way that image had existed, although the years they would have worn out. That drawing did not represent a lie, but a promise that was now being fulfilling. Little by little, without haste, Victoria was recovering something she never believed possible. To belong to a place without having to beg for love. With he time, Victoria opened a small antique shop in the center of the town. He used part of the inheritance to restore pieces, many of them inherited of the business that your grandfather had started decades ago. It was not an ambitious project nor a business millionaire, but he gave meaning. Each object had history, and she was in charge of telling them to whoever I'd like listen to them. Some customers came back just to chat. Others, they said that the place had something special, as if the time would walk slower there. Victoria would like to think that in some way his grandfather also was present in that space, not as a ghost, but as a living memory, as a firm root in the land that was now theirs. He never spoke again publicly of the subject. Not it shared on networks, Dun converted in anecdote. When someone asked about his family, he replied with kind evasions, not because he denied it happened, but because I didn't want to give him more space than he deserved. He learned to live with that wound without need to show it. I understood that there is pains that are not overcome with speeches or revenge, but with presence and truth. And that was what she had achieved. A life where he didn't have to prove anything or justify his place, where he simply I was, whole, free and at peace. 1 year after getting her house back, Victoria organized an intimate dinner. She invited only 3 people: Roger, the notary who had handed over the will, and a neighbor older than Mr. Ellis remembered with affection. There were no speeches nor toast bombastic, just home-cooked food, soft music and quiet laughter. At the end of the night, lit the radio of the grandfather and tuned into a jazz station they used to listen together. No one understood the gesture completely, but she, yes. It was his way to close the circle, to give silent thanks. There was no need to explain anything. He had found his home within a story that others they tried to erase. The last time he returned to the room of the grandfather was in a grey Sunday. He sat down next to the window with a blanket over it, legs and a cup of tea warm between his hands. The silence of the house no longer. It hurt. It calmed him. He opened a drawer of the desk, took out one of the letters that he had written, the shortest of all, and read in a low voice. You were never alone, even if they made you feel that way. She didn't need any more. She closed the letter, then he returned it to the envelope and carefully put everything back together. When he stood up, he felt that there were no more ghosts in that room, only memories, and a kind presence that, although invisible, he continued over there. Sometimes, while I was walking along the neighborhood, people like it asked if I was thinking of selling the house. Some they knew what there was past, the rumor had spread scattered, halfway, and others simply they felt curiosity. Victory always responded its same, without doubt. It is not for sale. Not because we'll need the place as property, but because it was the only thing I really felt his. It wasn't a material attachment. It was the only corner from the world where she didn't have to protect herself from anyone, where she wasn't the forgotten daughter nor the ignored sister. It was her without embellishments, and that had no price. I wasn't planning on returning it. A square meter to whom they tried delete it from the family map. They spoke with Roger many times about forming your own family, but without pressure. They did it from a different place without outside expectations. The important thing was that now everything was born from the freedom, not from the lack. If they decided to have children, they would know that they would never carry with the unresolved wounds of no one. Victoria Takes It had promised himself same. I would. Not repeat the history. He had cut a cycle, although nobody it recognized. And that was enough. No one else needed validated. Because when you learn to be whole inside, you no longer depend on the rest of the world to understand. As got there. Just keep going. Forward. Without noise, without explanations. With peace. The day it was fulfilled exactly a year since that fake birthday, Victoria didn't do no symbolic gesture. No flowers, no candles, no tributes. He only prepared breakfast, watered the plants and left the radio on all the time day. In the afternoon, he walked to the cemetery and placed a small plaque with the Mr. Ellis' his full name in the quietest corner of the cemetery. No one else there was done. It was just a stone simple with his name, your dates and a line that said, you were home in a world that wasn't one. Then he sat down for a moment. He took a deep breath and left without looking back. There was no drama in his gesture, only presence, only love. The good kind, the kind that doesn't need witnesses. Victoria never wrote again about what happened. But if ever someone I asked him what was most importantly of all, I wouldn't talk of the money, nor of the judgment, nor of the deception. I would say it was the exact moment in which her husband whispered in his ear, "That's not your grandfather." Because in that second, although not new still, he began to recover his history. The history that others they wanted to erase it, but she rebuilt with silences, memory and courage. And from then on, he lived knowing something that was not clear to me before, that his place in the world never depended on the approval from anyone, that its value was not negotiable, and that there are truths that, although hurt, they release.